Well, the U.S. State Department has released its annual human rights report, which says governments around the world are cracking down on basic freedoms. The report, released by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, is particularly critical of Russia and China. But Kerry also criticized the state of press freedom in Turkey. Kerry says the Turkish government has used laws to stifle legitimate political discourse and investigative journalism. Well, for reaction from the Turkish government, we're joined on the phone now by Ravza Kavakci, a member of parliament from the ruling AK party. Ravza, thanks so mumuch for joining us. First, let me get your reaction to these statements from John Kerry.
I just got a chance to look over the report. It's a 74-page report, pretty long, and I find it very disappointing and biased and far from being academic. I couldn't see where they have their references, and I understand that they may. This is a biased report. It's very, very disappointing because one of the allegations is that there's a crackdown on journalism, and we know that a lot of people know that it's a fact in Turkey that we are dealing with terrorism on one side, and we are also dealing with an organization that's acting like a fifth column of government, a deep state organization, Güleniz, which are based right now. Their leader is in Pennsylvania, and President Erdogan repeatedly warned the United States about what a threat they are to national security of Turkey and to other countries as well. And I see that the report has been written from a Gülenist perspective. And this is an organization that's, like I said, that Turkey is dealing with and is acting as a state of its own.
Okay.
So I find it rather disappointing. That's my first personal reaction. Of course, I'm not speaking on behalf of the government, but I'm speaking as a member of parliament from AK Party.
Okay, let me ask you then also personally, regardless of whether you feel action taken against certain members of the press is justified, it is undeniably hurting Turkey's image abroad, and the perception is that Turkey is increasingly becoming autocratic. Is there perhaps a better way to approach the issue of press freedom?
Let me state it this way. When we look at the people who are from the press that are in, for instance, in prison, there's only 3 people who are holding official press cards that are in prison in Turkey, and they have been either found guilty because of dealing with terrorism or some other crime that they have committed. So that's one issue. There is an anti-propaganda about Turkey regarding especially the issue of freedom, and the Gülen lobby is very powerful. One of the issues that came up on the press and all over the world a few months ago was, for instance, the Zaman paper, one of the Gülenist papers, or the media companies related with the Gülenists that were being controlled, investigated by the government. And this was a big issue. But these organizations, these companies happened to be media companies, but they were being investigated for insider trading, tax evasion, and other things, price manipulation, which are illegal in many countries all over the world. So that is, I think, the perspective we need to look at it. Or the 2 journalists, Erdem Gül and Can Dündar, who were taken into custody, but now they're on trial, but they're not in prison anymore. So they're being tried without being under custody. They are being tried for for espionage, for giving information regarding national security. In no country in the world, not in the United States or in Europe or any other country, will this be something that will be accepted by any government.
Okay. Let me ask you, though, one of the issues I've heard members of the foreign press complain about is how to distinguish between criticizing the president and insulting the president. Because journalists argue that criticism is unfairly being labeled as insults, which are against the law here.
Yeah, I was one of the people who was on the president's team when we visited Washington, D.C. And in one of the meetings I sat, in which we had important leaders like important U.S. leaders, prominent politicians and prominent people in other areas in the United States as our invitees, President Erdogan showed us, had a presentation about many of the insults that he had faced, and many of the papers that were that published these insults or something that was in the line between passing the line over criticism to insult, like very horrible caricatures about him, his family. And he said he took them to court, but these papers, in some cases he won, some cases he didn't. So these papers are still papers that are published in Turkey. Criticism is something that's acceptable. I think we had seen an example similar to this in the United States. Racial comments were made when President Obama was first elected.
Okay.
Ugly, ugly cartoons. I mean, this is not something that would be acceptable.
Okay.
And if he, sure.
Ravza Kavakci, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, we're over time, but thanks so much for sharing your opinions with us on TRT World.